Hey guys, welcome to Bantha Fodder. We're beginning right now. Show begins right now. Today we're going to talk about empathy. Empathy is what we're actually going to talk about today. Very, 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 very important topic. I would say a lot of people misunderstand empathy. Empathy is not putting yourself in the place of another person. That's emotional projection. I've talked about this before. Empathy is understanding how other people feel, understanding how they think, but really understanding how they feel. And so I think there's a big disconnect whenever people are thinking about how other people are going to feel. It's not bad to start with the theory of mind that's most obvious to us, which is ourselves, right? Our theory of mind begins with ourselves, that we understand that we have thoughts and feelings, and we see other people and we imagine that they have thoughts and feelings. So the model that we're going to use for modeling their thoughts and feelings is going to be our own thoughts and feelings. You know, getting hit with a hammer, we don't like that. It feels bad. So if, naturally, if we hit someone else with a hammer, they're not going to like it and they're going to feel bad. This is an interesting thing to think about with, for instance, sociopathy. As it's like, does the sociopath not understand that it causes pain? Yes, he does, but it doesn't matter to him. But it doesn't, there's no feeling of that pain, that it's bad that other person feels pain. If that makes any sense. But we can get trapped into thinking that other people are like us, right? That this group of people over there is just like us, but they're in a different place, and that's not really how it works. So the reason I'm leading with empathy is that when you are thinking about how other cultures operate, the whole idea of another culture being different is that those people are acting differently from you and me. They are thinking differently and they are feeling differently. And the way that the culture operates and the way that people express themselves within their culture, the way that they operate within the cultural matrix is, by it being different, produces a different set of thought patterns. So Izzat, if you don't know what this is, this became kind of a meme on Twitter over the last, couple of days. I wrote an article on it that'll be published tomorrow, I think. So let me give you the Substack. Last Substack article was on the Chipson dilemma, which is really the problem of scam, of making a fake thing, the problem of fake things, whether it's a fake AI image or it's a fake guitar. Who's being victimized when you make a fake thing? So I go through the moral problem with that is that you're really depending on an asymmetry of knowledge in order to gain whatever financial gain you're trying to get out of selling a fake Gibson. Really depends on some kind of asymmetry of information. So anyway, when we talk about Izzat is the hard to define social status and credit system that works in the Indian subcontinent and within the culture and cultures of India. I don't want to portray India as completely a monoculture. It's like you think, well, there's all these Hindu, right? They're Hindu, their religion is Hindu. Kind of. Right? Hinduism, you can read up on this, is a bit of a construct because there's many folk religions, kind of like with paganism. There's no one paganism. There's no such thing as paganism. There's the worship of gods and the piety towards those gods, and that varies by region and by cult and things like that. So that's also true in India, right? It's not just that there's Hindu and yoga and Islam or something. Islam is something very different from Hinduism, but there's many different practices that make that up. But the idea of Izzat is very pervasive, and the feedback that I've gotten on it especially is this is a thing that's really common in northern India. It's present a little bit everywhere. If you think of how the caste system works, I read another article a while back. I'm trying to remember who wrote it. It was written by an Indian, and his whole point was as an outsider, you hear about this caste system and you're like, oh, this caste system's bad. He goes, but really, India is a land of 1 billion castes. Everybody is trying to have a different and superior social relationship to everybody else. And so everything that they do is designed to undermine another person's social standing and lower them, like give them negative Izzat, or it is attempting to improve their own social standing. And so you're going to gain social standing by gaining wealth or by taking wealth away from people. So somebody from Kiwi Farms wrote a really good write-up on that, and I will I'll go ahead and just link the X post. You guys can read it whenever you feel inclined to read it. It's pretty good. That's a pretty good read. And the reason I want to bring this up is that a lot of times when we're thinking of immigrants, we're thinking immigrants are like us, and they are like us in a lot of ways. And it's important when we're looking at another culture to kind of start at the places where we're the same, so that we can gain an understanding of the ways that a culture is different. Cultures aren't just arbitrary things that produce different food because of where they're located and things like that. If you follow the modern kind of multicultural mindset to its conclusions, it basically would mean that there is no such thing as culture, like culture is arbitrary, but I don't really think that. And I think being able to understand where other people are coming from is really important. So when you are talking about Indians, if you have one family of Indians immigrate to the United States, and I knew this because I grew up with Indians, right? I had Indian friends in high school. I had even a close friend who was Indian. And you wouldn't have any idea that they had this concept called Izzat, because when they're surrounded by normal white Americans, they don't do this stuff. They just act normally, right? Because they're second generation and they just get kind of sucked into the flow of American culture. And that's fine. And usually that's kind of what the American idea of immigration is. Somebody comes over here and they get kind of subsumed into the American culture and become American in their practices and then eventually in their thoughts. And there's a lot of thoughts that you don't realize create our wealth until you go to a place that doesn't have those thoughts. And India is one of those places, but Izzat is really the social system that India expresses that we might call low trust society that's present in many third world countries. Or you might call it a shame-based society versus a guilt-based society. Those are really good analogies for thinking of Izzat. And the reason it matters is that if you bring over lots of people, when they are in their own little group and enclave, they just reproduce the cultural practices and the cultural thoughts from their home country. And then they may reproduce those basically against the native population in a way that other people are not prepared for. If you're getting a phone call, I'll just give you an example. If you're getting a phone call, and you don't recognize the number, are you going to pick up the phone? If it was 1995, you would just pick up the phone if it rang. But now nobody picks up the phone. Why? Because it's a scammer. Where's the scammer from? What nationality is the scammer going to be? You guys already know this. They're going to be Indian. Why are Indians able to do phone scams? Well, because it doesn't really violate their cultural mores and practices to scam people out of money. For their home culture, scamming people out of money doesn't really matter. In fact, if you're able to scam someone out of money, it's because you're smarter than them and they're stupider than you. Whereas here in the West, our default way of thinking about price systems, for example, is that they're honest. It's an honest bid. Like if you go to a store and something is $2, you just think it's $2. You don't think about going up to the store counter and being like, I'll give you $1 for this. You don't think about haggling. We assume that the price information is actual price information. But when you're in an economy where everybody's asking for something randomly, depending on the social standing of the two participants, they're going to change the price. They're going to change what they're trying to do to try to scam everybody out of something. Then price information doesn't have any information. It doesn't tell you anything. You don't really know how much the candy bar is worth because it could be worth anything. You don't really know how much services cost because they could be worth anything. Only if you're very clever, meaning you fight everybody on every single cent that they want to charge, can you start to slowly over time understand this price system which is not displayed anywhere. It's completely subtextual. This is the way things operate in a lot of third world countries. And if you've never experienced that, I mean, you maybe can experience that if you're in America. Like if you go to Mexico and you go to like a market in Mexico or something, you can kind of expect to haggle a little bit. But usually the price information is pretty close, even if you have to haggle in Mexico. It's not that way in like Iraq, where like nobody has a price displayed because you need to ask, and what the price that I'm going to give you is going to be dependent on how much money I think I can get out of you. Or maybe like if you go to Chinatown in New York, like you go to some of these markets that are full of maybe gray market goods, you may find that there's no price information. You have to discover the price information by arguing and haggling with people. But yeah, so if you have this continent of a billion different little castes and everybody's trying to get one on everybody else, you're like, why do Indians want to scam us? Well, they scam each other too, right? It's not a white man bad kind of thing. It's just applying their culture to a foreign culture where we have a high trust society where we trust each other in a whole bunch of different ways. Our economy runs on trust. We rarely think about the trust that's involved in our economy to allow us to work efficiently and smoothly. There's so much time wasted. There's so much effort wasted. There's money wasted, because time is money, by not having accurate price information or by having every single interaction be a scam. You lose a lot of stuff. We've lost our ability to just pick up the phone, to just call other people. We lost an entire mode of communication basically because of scams. So if you imagine that on a larger scale where it's like the shopkeeper, everybody's trying to scam you, chances are you would not like it. The reason it's relevant is I go back to, I grew up with Indians. They didn't do this. Why? Well, because they weren't in India. They were in America. So they adopted the social practices of America because those are the practices of 99% of the people around them. And then they start to think like Americans. Like, you need to be honest with your price system. You need to be honest when dealing with people. If you scam them out of money, you may never get a job. They'll spread around that you're a crook and you won't get a job again. This line of thinking may be absent in a lot of third world countries. And so if you're importing large groups of people from one area, you're going to have those cultural problems. It's one of these things that people have a lot of difficulty understanding the difference between individuals and groups. I encountered this a lot with the baby boomer video, is that they thought, I'm not like this, or it was always boomers, but I'm not like this. Yes, but the group, this is the way the group acts as a group. And so when you're thinking about Izzat, you're thinking about how the group acts as a group, not how individuals act. But I'll give you an anecdote with, some of the Indians I grew up with. I had a close friend, and he was basically Americanized. He was second generation. His parents were from India, but he was still in the Indian culture because obviously, all of his siblings were married to other Indians. They didn't marry white Americans or anything. So they married people in their religion. They married people, they did things in their culture kind of outside of like school and work and things like that. They were local business owners. They didn't run their businesses dishonestly, in my opinion, but they were businesses that they did run a little bit of gray market stuff, right? Like they would have Cuban cigars under the counter and things like that at their local liquor store. But I started to realize that they had different cultural practices as I got to better know my friends, like that they would have to stop and explain, like, okay, this is a thing with my culture that maybe needs some explanation. So if they got a new car, they wouldn't drive that car around very much. They wouldn't show off the car. Whereas an American would get a new car and they'd be excited about it. They'd like drive it to church and be like, I got this new car. And the reason is because other Americans think it's cool to look at a nice car, and they will congratulate you for being able to buy a car, and they think it's cool that you have a car. And the other social stuff of like jealousy and stuff is not as much on the radar. Well, for Indians, it's like, if they see us with a new car, they'll know we're doing really well. And all of a sudden, people will call in their debts even if those debts are imaginary, they'll think that you owe them something. Like, oh, so-and-so is doing well. How can I get money out of them? You owe us for this. Can you get us a job doing this? Can you get us money doing this? You should do business with us. You should choose our company because, I chose your company in the past. You owe us, right? And you're doing great. So of course you can afford to pay us what we want, right? Or people start to ask for favors. Can you hire us? Can you do this? So the display of wealth all of a sudden becomes a social issue because it shows that you've moved up too much. And if you move up too quickly, then everybody's going to start having a claim, I guess, a claim on what you're doing. It's weird. It's weird because Americans don't really think that way. But when it comes to these Indian families, everything was a negotiation and everything was interconnected and everything was a bid for different status with each other. I got to learn a little bit about these, while they function normally at school, they don't do any of this stuff at school. Why would, think of a 16-year-old. Why would a 16-year-old hide the fact that he bought a new cool car, like a sports car? He wouldn't. He'd show off to his friends. Why didn't he show off? Because his Indian friends would all of a sudden, it would create that issue, right? You can't show it off too soon. That's kind of what it is. So you start encountering some interesting different cultural practices. So when I talk about empathy, it's like to understand how these people actually think means to understand the ways that they think that maybe you don't approve of and maybe you don't like and maybe you would prefer if they thought differently. One of the big mistakes, both sides make this. It's not like a liberal Republican thing. It's just the way that we're built here in a high trust society in the West is we operate on good faith, and our starting point is to assume other people are operating on good faith. When in India and in a lot of other third world countries, it's the opposite. You need to start with an assumption of bad faith, and only as you argue and haggle and ferret out information can you gain enough to where you think the person you're going to be able to actually get something valuable out of the person. This is why there's so much corruption in India. This is why there's so much corruption in the third world as well. This is why there's styrofoam bridges in China. It's a low trust versus high trust society. In a high trust society, we start with assuming people are operating on good faith, and they generally are. And the fact is, if you put one immigrant into a white American schoolroom, they will operate, they'll get into the cultural flow. They won't become the scammer in the room because they'll start to understand how other people think by interacting with them. They quickly update their mental software to one that operates in that environment. But if you have a whole classroom of them, then it's just an Indian classroom in America. It's no longer that melting pot that people want to talk about. It just becomes a little piece of a foreign culture, and a foreign culture that it's okay to say, we don't want that. We don't want that bit of that foreign culture in America. We actually don't want that. And you need to not be that way. You need to not care about Izzat. You need to not think of status in this way. But are you going to deprogram those people? Probably not. Is the dirt going to magically transform the way that they think so that they all just magically abandon Izzat, the Izzat thought process? No, that's not going to happen. That's really naive to think that that's the way that things are going to work, because have they ever worked that way before? Not that I'm aware of, right? So yeah, I gave you some good anecdotes. Think of high trust versus low trust society. The other one that I've heard is a shame versus a guilt society. In India, it's a shame society. So, and this works this way in because we're focusing on Izzat and we're thinking about India and the fact that all of these accounts recently on X were revealed to be Indian. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because they don't really have any care about being honest or dishonest. It's mostly about, I could gain some money by doing this. And somebody even in the video that I made on that, pointed out hey, for an Indian, making Elon bucks is like a living. So you can't be mad at them. It's I could be mad at them for being dishonest. Being dishonest, yes, that's a judgment that we have independent of culture. That's the difference. One of the differences between our cultures. Yeah, I understand that you're scamming people and that you don't have to get a lot of money scamming them to build a living, but you're scamming people, and we don't like that, right? We don't go, oh yeah, of course, it's understandable. It's yes, I understand that, and I don't like it. I understand why you're doing it. And I think it's bad. So a shame society, shame is external to the self, right? Shame exists between you and other people, whereas guilt is internal. When you do something bad in Christian society and you're operating with a Christian mindset and Christian morals, the weight of that sin is on you as an individual, on yourself. You need to go to confession. You need to figure out how to make amends. It's like you find out about, I think the person who shot Charlie Kirk, got guilty enough to turn himself in, right? People are afflicted by guilt and confess their sins to people because they have to alleviate this guilt, even if it causes punishment on them. It's a guilt-based society. We internalize sin versus a shame-based society. The problem is that other people know that you did wrong. So the action doesn't become really a problem for the person until they lose social status because they got found out, right? They got revealed to be a dishonest scammer that everyone laughs at. They lose Izzat. Minus 100 Izzat. Minus 8 million Izzat, whatever it is. They lose status. And this little thing that I think is a pretty good explanation of it. I mean, I've heard people talk about Izzat before. Like I said, I think it's India's way of expressing this is a person can spiral enough to end up committing suicide because they lose all of their face, right? Kind of like in Japan that could happen, or China. It's if you lose everything, eventually you end up going no, you can't get anything done without Izzat. That's the way it is in India. So if you get shamed enough, you actually won't, the police won't help you because you're too low status to be helped. Your neighbors will just steal from you because there's no consequence to stealing from somebody who's an untouchable. Things like that. Life becomes unbearably bad if you have zero Izzat. So you just, you view suicide as better. But the shame is not that you lied or that you stole from people or that you scammed people. The shame is that you got found out as a low status person that has to do that. Does that make sense? Whereas if you're able to, somebody comes to stay at a hotel and they show up, they've booked it, they've paid ahead of time. You're well, the room is actually not 800 rupees. It's, or what do they use it? Rupees? I'm going to say rupees. I know that's the Zelda. My mind is blinking. Is it rubles? Or am I thinking of Russia? Anyway, it's not 800 rupees. It's 1,600 rupees. And we can't give you the room unless you give us another 800. It's you said it was 800, right? In America, we'd be no, you have a contract with me and I'll sue you. I'll just take you to the court system if you don't give me the room that you. But in India, it's go to the court system. The court's I'm not gonna rule you in your favor because your Izzat is too low, right? So if you feel like you can get an extra 800 out of someone, you will. And if they push back enough, or they make enough threats, or they come get the police and the police are going to side with them, which they almost never do, right? It's okay, well, I'll give it to you for 800. You're very clever. You're very, very clever. Do you want that in America? I guess is my question there. So that's the shame. That's shame, right? The shame only happens when you get caught, whereas guilt is inside. It's inside the self, and that makes a big difference there. So, yeah, I'll take a look at the chat in just a minute. But I wanted to talk about that. That's Izzat, and I think it's pretty relevant for where we're going here in America, not just for Indian culture, but any other culture where we're importing large numbers of people. We could talk about Mexican culture as well. Mexican culture doesn't have Izzat, but it has its own issues that people talk about, like machismo and the vendetta culture and things like that. These were problems with Italian immigrants and Irish immigrants, is that they brought over their cultural practices, and you had to actively discourage people from engaging in those cultural practices so that you could have the cultural practices you want. And the fact is, a huge part of our wealth is derived from our cultural practices. It's not just our IQ, right? Italy has, if I remember correctly, Italy has the highest IQ in the world, but what's their GDP per capita? Well, that's the difference between cultures, right? It's not just IQ makes wealth. IQ plus a good high trust culture where there's consequences to bad actions. There's neutral parties like courts that can help enforce contracts. And there are, basically all the interpersonal standards that we use to do business. That's what creates the wealth of the United States to a great extent, and indeed the entire West, much more so than just IQ by itself, if that makes any sense. So, all right, let's take a look at the chat. Boom, lots of chats today. Let's start with the super chats. All right. $5 from Dashing Rogue. The engineers are like the Tau Empire from 40K. Or the engines are like the Tau Empire from 40K. Jeets need to be removed for the greater good. We get that that's a little slur, right? H-1Bs need to leave. They infiltrated tech like the Tau. So the H-1B scam is kind of like this, right? You gain Izzat by hiring other Indians because they owe you a debt when you hire them. And you have control of them because they're your employees. It's kind of like the Ferengi. You know, the Ferengi from Star Trek are like kind of this caricature of third world capitalism where it's like, treat employees like your family. Exploit them. So the H-1B scams where you have entire companies that are dedicated to doing like 100 applications for one person to do one H-1B and then you get it. H-1Bs, keep in mind, also are basically indentured servitude, although it's higher paying than indentured servitude was. Back in, the 16th century or whatever. But it's basically indentured servitude. You can't really leave that position. So if you can hire Indian H-1Bs and you're an Indian manager, you have total control over them. You have like a massive social control over them, and it increases your ESOT exponentially among your community. Right? So H-1Bs, and if we think about immigration, Mexican and Latin American immigration really affects the lower classes. Immigrants who are already here, whether they're from Mexico or somewhere else in Latin America, the unchecked immigration from the South massively suppresses their wages, as well as the wages of Black Americans and poor white Americans. So our Americans that are already here, that are on the lower economic rungs, when you have infinite immigration, it suppresses wages. So the wages for unskilled labor are basically in the dirt. That's kind of why there's so much arguments about minimum wage is workers can't really demand a good wage because there's infinite workers. We just import all of them. And the people who benefit from that are the businesses, obviously, that hire cheap labor, and the people who benefit from cheap labor, which is largely capital. So while that problem is a big negative for the lower classes, it's a positive for like the upper middle, like upper management, upper middle class to the elite. Illegal immigration is a big positive because it generates all this wealth. The wealth being the difference between what you would have to pay an American worker in a normal economy where they're able to negotiate for high wages and what you could pay a third worlder who, because of like what this person said in the comment, they can make a living off of less because it's cheaper. It's cheaper in India or whatever. Even if you bring them in here, like they find ways, they $300 to them is a lot more than $300 to someone who's an American. It makes a big difference. H-1Bs are that, but to the American middle class, regardless of race or anything like that. So H-1Bs are more on it because the kids who grew up, the Gen Z kids in particular who grew up, they were told to go get a STEM degree and make some money, that they'd be able to get a good job in tech or engineering or something like that. They went and did that, and then they can't get hired for any price because whatever listing for a normal salary exists, they'll hire an H-1B at actually less than that. So yeah, the H-1Bs just take away the American middle class jobs, the jobs that the people who went to college and took on lots of debt in order to get that access to that job were told to do this by people they trusted, and they're out of work because of H-1Bs. And then when they do get a job, their salary's lower, and it's so low that they, even though it might be higher than somebody who's like picking oranges or something, the person picking oranges doesn't have $100,000 in student debt. So it might be higher than that, but it's still lower than it otherwise would be if we didn't have all of the foreign labor moving in to affect that. The people who benefit from that are the elite. The elite benefit from that because they save on that big labor cost that exists in things like tech. And then we have this question of where's this competency crisis coming from? Well, it's not hard to figure out where that competency crisis is coming from. Where we have an American university system that has all of these filters and vets students to a point where they get a degree. Foreign universities don't do that, especially if it's like a random university in like the Caribbean or like India or something. You don't know what their standards are like. And the point is that you're hoping that this H-1B person from India is just as educated in this area as the American. And I think we're starting to see the effects that that's not really the case. But I think when we're talking about Izzat, one of the big points is they're not just trying to save money with the H-1B. They are doing it for cultural reasons, that there's a cultural element to this. And I don't know if you guys have ever worked in the trucking industry or had the displeasure of trying to bill an Indian trucking company, but I have. You think the call center stuff, they do the call center stuff on people trying to collect money from them because that's their cultural practice. They hire all their cousins so that they can have, extra social clout with them. Companies that don't start out as Indian become de facto Indian because once you get an Indian manager, he hires only other Indians because he gets something from hiring those Indians. It's not just nepotism. Nepotism is like, I'm going to hire my cousins. It's more like I can have status over my cousins by hiring them. I can have status over an Indian. So you have to understand this. That's why I led with empathy, is that if you want to understand how other people think, this is part of it, is understanding their cultural practices. Their cultural practices, how they're different from yours. And while if you have one person, it's not that big a deal. If you have a lot, then they don't just abandon their cultural practices just because they showed up in America, right? Another super chat from Zimamaro. Thank you for the super chat. Cal Penn and his crusade against Apu has done irreparable damage. Instead of people saying, thank you, come again, they say, do not redeem Sar. Yeah, Apu from The Simpsons was this kind of positive Indian character. There were still some negative things, right? Like he was actually trying to scam people a lot, but they really humanized him a lot. And they even had like an illegal immigration story where he had overstayed his student visa. He was actually a computer scientist and had just never left. And so he was actually an illegal immigrant. And wouldn't it be sad to actually deport Apu? And this is a bit of propaganda to talk about this, because what do? We think of the individual and we don't think of the group. We think of the characteristics of Apu and we don't think of the characteristics of actual illegal immigrants and why it matters. Like, for instance, for labor prices. So it humanizes them. And this is something that the left has been very good at doing over the last few decades, is they find a human interest story. Why are these human interest stories on the news? Well, they're propaganda, because you can find one anecdote. You can always find one person that is sympathetic. By sympathetic, I mean, it's like you feel the same way that they feel. They have a sad experience and you feel sad that they have the sad experience. So you can find that sympathetic person that you don't think should be kicked out of the country, that you think should be allowed to stay. And then they use that to normalize your thought about the entire group or the entire system or the entire issue at play. I call this arguing from the margins. I did a video on it. Arguing from the margins, sometimes called like the Mott and Bailey fallacy, which is you find something that's on the edge of whatever issue you're talking about, and you pretend like that somehow matters for the entire discussion. It's like, you're against abortion. What about if it's like this? And you find this edge case where it's like, this person was raped. Should they have to bear the baby? And it's like, that's a really tough edge case to talk about, because it's like, you don't want to tell someone that they have to do that, but that's not indicative of the entire issue of abortion at all. It's super rare. It's a super rare example of what they're talking about. So even if you capitulate on that one example, you have to say like, okay, well, we'll make an exception for that. We've reduced abortions by 99% then. Okay. So that's just as an example when I talk about like arguing from the margin. So this is one. What about this one sympathetic person who's been here for 30 years and has never committed a crime? It's like, he had 30 years to figure out his immigration status and he didn't do it. Like, sorry, I guess that sucks for him, and maybe he's not a super bad guy. There are worse moral failings in this world than not doing your immigration paperwork. But, I live in a world where I have to do a lot of government paperwork. If you own a home, you got to do government paperwork. You got to pay a lot of taxes. You have to register cars. Like, there's a lot of stuff you have to do with the government. Like, you can't get your visa squared away. You can't get a green card. You can't take the citizenship test or whatever. You can't do these things. What am I supposed to do? Like, how much sympathy am I supposed to have for that? The answer is you're supposed to have a lot, because you imagine all illegal immigrants are like this guy. It's poor Jose is getting deported, even though he's a good guy. oh, this is so bad that we're deporting illegal immigrants. It's like, yeah, but most illegal immigrants are not that, right? And you have to enforce the entire system, or you'd have no workers can't demand any kind of wage. You can't have any kind of control over your country. We had a shooting today. An immigrant shot a couple of National Guard members in Washington, an Afghani immigrant. I don't know if he was legal or illegal, but he's from Afghanistan. So he attacked and attempted to murder two armed service members, and he himself was severely injured, is what President Trump said, but he'll pay. Yeah. I guess you can't have a country because some people have a sad story. No, the way that we create systems because we want the systemic effects of those systems. And in some cases you get edge cases. And I was actually going to talk about this, and I might do a separate video on this as well, which is why UBI is not going to work. So I'll do a little rant on UBI in a minute. I have another super chat. Let me read that. Engines hate Christ because he redeems all. I wouldn't say that. I really wouldn't say that, because I think, the parts of, I've heard told that the parts of India that are most functional are the ones with the highest degree of Christianity, because they get out of that mindset, that Christ offers them a way to be out of that mindset. Redemption for the lowest of the low. I think that's part of the redemption message. So I don't think that they hate that, other than they're threatened by anything that, it's foreign, just like anybody is. Right. Let me talk about why UBI is not going to work. I'll maybe record this. We'll do a take, and then I could turn this into a separate video if I want to. Okay, so let's talk about UBI, Universal Basic Income, and why it's not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work really has to do with the liberal mind, and not just the liberal mind, I would say the American mind, which is very concerned with how especially children exist. Is very concerned with edge cases and with exceptions. So if you imagine universal basic income, which this idea is actually not that new. I know Andrew Yang is very associated with it, and he ran a campaign that just everybody's going to get an income every month. And then what you do with it is basically up to you, but everybody will get that income. This idea is actually not that new. It's even been floated by conservative and libertarian economists. Milton Friedman floated this as a negative income tax. So the problem with a lot of subsidies that we have is they go away as people make more money. So there becomes a point where you make enough money that you don't qualify for all of the subsidies, you don't qualify for all the benefits, but you don't make enough money that the amount of money that you make offsets the value of those. So the point of a negative income tax is that it softens that. It softens that so that you can keep making money, and the subsidy just kind of slowly goes away until you don't need it anymore. That was the idea behind negative income tax. UBI would be that, but we just don't even check because doesn't matter. Everybody gets $3,000 a month. And if you're making $100,000 a month, you get $3,000 a month. And if you're making $5 a month, you get an extra $3,000 a month. And obviously for the poor person, it makes a huge difference. And for the massively wealthy person, it makes no difference, but whatever. It's completely fair. Now, the attraction to that is that you are going to replace our social welfare system with UBI. And for people who are intelligent, middle class, and above thinkers, this makes a lot of sense. It's like I could live, I'm imagining, I'll just use myself as this model, theory of mind, right? If I can imagine sort of my poorest experience was making $1,000 a month. So if I had $3,000 a month and I was in that situation, it would have been amazing. I would have had such a better lifestyle, but I was still able to live fine on $1,000 a month. So that extra $3,000 a month would have funded a lot of upward mobility for me, and ability to do better with my businesses, and to certainly live more riotously. It would have made a big difference. Now, $3,000 a month would still make a big difference, but it wouldn't be nearly as big an impact as when I was at my poorest. And I think about if I was poor, how would I have spent all of the money? The problem is low rent people. And that's what's going to happen with UBI, is that if you give everybody $2,000 a month, whatever you decide it's going to be, they're not going to spend it on the vital things of life that you imagine you would spend it on. They're going to, if you give them a $2,000 check, they're going to spend it on all kinds of things that you wouldn't approve of. All kinds of things that you wouldn't do if you were in their place. We're going back to that empathy thing. You have to know how they feel, not how you would feel if you were them. That's emotional projection. So they would spend it on Carnival cruises, and they would spend it on new sneakers and clothes, and they would spend it on food and booze and whatever other things that would piss the money away into the gutter, and they would be just as poor as before. And the smart people among them would make great use of that money, which is true, but a lot of people wouldn't. Not all of them, but a lot of them wouldn't. And you'd have this problem, and we have this problem now, which is that the people on food stamps don't feed their children. The people on food stamps don't feed their children. This is going to sound bizarre to you, but it's true. That's why we have free or reduced school lunch programs. This is a thing. This was a thing I taught at a Title I school. This was a big thing. Everybody, almost every kid had free lunch. And then some schools they don't even test for income anymore. It's just everybody gets a free lunch. It's little mini UBI. I wondered about this. Like, why are all these kids getting free or reduced lunch? Can't their parents buy them lunch? It's not that expensive. Can't they like pack a lunch for them? The parents won't do it. The parents won't pack a lunch for them. The parents are too checked out. They won't do anything for their kids. They won't even feed their kids with the food stamps that they get. This was a thing too. It's like, so the parents who get the food stamps, and I remember back in the day, I found out like these families were getting like $800 a month in food stamps, which is like quadruple my eating budget or quadruple like my family's budget for food. It's definitely, let me think. No, it's probably double. It's probably double my family's budget and like quadruple the money that I would ever have spent on food. Even, I used to spend like $100 a month on food when I was really poor, which is like now would be maybe $200 a month. But anyway, the point is, they don't feed their kids. So we have to feed the kids. You cannot tolerate kids being hungry. And as Americans, it's offensive to us that kids would go hungry because their parents are bad. So we make them go to school. We will feed them at school. And now a lot of schools do free breakfast, free lunch, free dinner. You get 3 free meals. They'll feed you a meal at 7 a.m. when the buses will come early so that the kids can eat breakfast from 7:30 to 8. They'll have a free like a free treat or whatever for like a morning break. They'll have a brunch, free lunch, and then they'll have an afternoon meal. They'll have a free dinner like at 3:30 or 4 or something. So there's schools that give 3 free meals, 3 square meals a day to kids because their parents on food stamps won't feed them. So not all of them, a small percentage. But we can't tolerate that. If there's that one kid at school who doesn't eat, that's an intolerable situation for us. And I know teachers, because I was one, right? If there was one kid coming to school and he was sitting by himself and not eating, that teacher would buy him lunch. The teachers would take the money out of their own paycheck and they would buy that student lunch. Now, that's actually way more efficient than what free or reduced school lunch would do. If you took away free or reduced school lunch programs and every kid had to pay for his own food or bring his own food, they would, and there'd be like 1 or 2 kids and the teachers would buy him food. And that would be so much cheaper and more efficient than what we do, which is in order to avoid this edge case problem of one kid in the corner who's not being fed by his irresponsible parents, we then create a giant, expensive socialist system that serves everybody and probably does it poorly. It's not like, I don't know if you grew up with this experience that like the school lunch was garbage. Captain Underpants would make fun of it. I'm like, I guess more things change the more they stay the same. The school lunch is garbage and we have to, so we're paying a whole lot of money. Schools are a point of sale for welfare. I've talked about this before. One of the point, public school is a joint product. It doesn't just produce education; it produces all kinds of welfare products. One of them is food, free or reduced school lunch for kids. So, we spend a lot of money to feed the kids, probably food that's not as nutritious as we would actually eat ourselves. But you can't tolerate that starving kid. It's the same thing. Here's a human interest story. Here's this family who can't eat. Americans can't tolerate that. If your neighbor came to you and was like, "I'm hungry," you would make him a sandwich, right? I certainly would. That's the American way of thinking. We're very charitable. We're very caring for our neighbors, that sort of thing. But with UBI, you'd have that same problem, which is that why should, you can't have UBI without a big tolerance for some people are just not going to act optimally. They're not even going to act suboptimally. They're going to be bad. They're going to be the low rent people. And you have to figure out whether you can tolerate people doing that and to what degree you're going to tolerate that if you want to have something like UBI. So what you'd actually have with UBI is you'd have universal basic income plus all the other social welfare programs we have, because the fact is there's no amount of UPI that you can give to certain people that will alleviate their behaviors. They will still act in the same way. You could give them a UBI of $10,000 a month. You'd find that they bought a car and their kids were hungry. You give them $10,000 a month. You find that the parents overdosed on a drug and cost the medical system a huge amount of money in addition to that, right? Or they couldn't pay the medical bill. Maybe we got rid of socialized medicine or something. And then all of a sudden you have to figure out how to provide for that edge case, right? We can't let kids go hungry or go naked or anything like that. So it's just not tolerable to the American mindset. We're too charitable. We're too caring for other people. So what you'd end up with is UBI plus all the social programs we have. It would just be an extra expense. You couldn't replace all of our many social welfare programs with UBI. We're too paternalistic. That's the other thing too, is once you have your finger in somebody else's pie, once you are giving them something, giving them money, you start to want to dictate how they're using it because you're giving it to them for a purpose. If the purpose is to alleviate poverty, then they need to be spending it on ways that address the poverty. That's why we have food stamps. Food stamps exist as an alternative to direct payments, because it turns out when you make direct payments to people, some people will spend it on food and clothes. Other people will spend it on booze and let their kids go hungry and naked. So you create food stamp that's like, you can't buy booze with this. You can only buy food so your kids won't be hungry. Then they still don't feed their kids, so you give them free lunch at school. And meanwhile, all the people on food stamps are obese. That's a whole nother one. I've done another video about that before, that the poorest among us are actually the most obese because food is so cheap and so plentiful. And we give so much money to people for them to buy cheap, plentiful, high-calorie food, delicious food. And it's not a moral failing. I don't think people are morally bad for giving in to temptation and eating a lot of really good tasting food. There's far worse moral flaws than eating too much good tasting food, in my opinion. But that's what I think about that. You guys, of course, can tell me what you think about that down below in the comments. Have a good one. All right, I did a little take there. Pretty fun. You have this. You can't legislate morality. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. No offense, but that's actually one of the dumbest things you could say. Of course you can legislate morality. We do it all the time. Theft is illegal and it's immoral. Fraud is illegal and it's immoral. We legislate morality all the time. We do it all the time. If you mean, when people say this, they mean degenerate morality. No offense to you, but let's talk about those three levels of morality. You absolutely can legislate morality. We do it all the time. That's what all of our laws are. We're legislating morality. Let's talk about those three levels of morality that I've talked about. Antisocial. This is the obvious one. No steal, no hit, no kill. Antisocial behavior. Everyone agrees on what that is. We make that illegal. We create a legal system that punishes it. Nobody really fights on whether theft should be legal or illegal. The Indian with the Izzat merely argues that it's acceptable for him to do, and you're stupid if he gets away with it. The next one down is going to be delinquent behavior. So delinquency is not meeting your contractual obligations, not meeting an obligation which you have. So delinquency would be you don't pay your bills. You did something, you agreed to pay a bill, you didn't pay that bill, you get sued. We have a court system for that. So you think the criminal courts at the top, you could think civil courts deal with delinquency. You acted negligently, you owe someone money, that's delinquency. You failed to feed your children, that's delinquency, okay? And we find all kinds of ways to address that. The third level is degeneracy, which is these are things that are mostly against you and kind of in an indirect way affect the group. And so that's going to be being fat is degeneracy. That does affect the group. It increases the cost of medicine because we have a semi-socialized medical system. Even if you didn't, if you're obese, you're taking up a hospital bed that would be cheaper if you weren't in it. Things like that. So it would be, engaging in degenerate, destructive behaviors like using drugs. It makes you a less productive citizen, which makes everybody poorer because it lowers GDP, right? But it's indirect. The main person you're harming when you do drugs is you. But we legislate that stuff all the time, right? We did it with prohibition. Prohibition actually massively reduced the amount of alcoholism in the United States. It reduced the amount that people drank by a huge amount. It actually worked, despite lots of things about mob movies and distillers making things in radiators in the woods and whatever kinds of fun movies we have that talk about the crime that maybe pops up, because there's still a demand for the degenerate thing, for the booze. But it actually worked. And we're now seeing with legalization of marijuana that it also works the other way, is that once you make something legal, people think it's okay to do it. And when it was illegal, people thought it was generally not okay to do it. So the default was smoking pot is bad. Now you have to convince people that smoking pot is bad. They'll smoke it in the park. They'll stink up the park. They'll blow pot smoke at your kids. And then if you punch them in the face for that, you are the one who goes to jail. Okay, so yes, you can legislate morality, and we've seen that once you legalize something, people start to accept it as a good thing or as an appropriate thing. You can look at people talking about polyamory. Polyamory is completely legal, right? Polygamy is legal as long as you're not getting married to the person. It's completely legal. So there's all kinds of people who promote it. It's legal. It's good. It's legal, therefore good. And you have to do all kinds of convincing otherwise. Whereas if something was just illegal, then people just wouldn't do it. And they would automatically look down on people who did do it. So absolutely, you do legislate morality. And people think that like laws flow from morality. They do. But they also flow the other ways. That if you make something illegal, people will view it as bad. They absolutely will adopt that legal position because of, they will adopt the moral position of the greater legal situation. There's so many examples. You could probably think of dozens of them all on your own without me having to give them. Anyway, I'm going to go back up to the top and see if there's any good comments here for the rest of the show here. People replacing empathy with emotional projection explains why some are shocked to find out others have different opinions. How could you believe that? Because I can't imagine myself believing it. Yes, because you don't have any empathy. This is why when the left calls themselves the empathy ones, like the Democrats are the party of empathy. No, you don't have any empathy. You actually have severely retarded empathy. Your empathy is like squished down to non-existence. All you do is emotionally project, which is why you can only conceive of people who think differently as you as Hitlerite boogeymen. You can't think that they might actually have a reason for thinking what they think. Whereas on the conservative side, I find that conservatives have a really easy time steelmanning the opposite position. They have a really easy time thinking of what the other person is thinking and coming up with the counter arguments to that, which is why generally I see all the arguments on the right now, and I see all of the sophistry on the left now. It's not that there's no sophistry on the right. Don't mistake me there. But if I'm looking for arguments, I rarely see them on the left, but I see them constantly on the right. And one of the problems I have is that arguments don't really work. Because the person would have to, look inside of themselves and consider that they might be wrong or they might have thought of something wrong, Bayou Bomber. I never forget in grade school, we did a class assignment where we were given a cast drawn at random. I got the lowest class. It was the worst. Gave my classmates more reason to bully me. And I was also late to the carpool lane because I had to clean up when school was done for the day. And that caused me to get into trouble as well. Oh, what an awful social experiment. But is that an experiment in empathy or emotional projection? That is emotional projection. How would you feel if you were an Edda in feudal Japan? Well, I'd feel bad, but you don't know how the Edda feels. You don't know how that untouchable feels because you're not there. You're not in that culture adopting those thought patterns. You're just not doing it. Does restream mean that this is replay or this is a restream stream? It means it's streaming to two different channels. It's also streaming to the Bantha Fodder channel, which will be basically a record of all these shows when I'm done with them. Their collective mentality is no different than a poor man's mentality. They have a poor attitude about wealth and resources. Yeah. If you could cheat, cheat. Chinese proverb. Let's see here. I got the super chats. The rupee. It's the rupee. I was like, is it the ruble? That's Russian, right? It's the rupee. I thought it was the rupee. It's from Legend of Zelda. Get some rupees. Rupees. We turn the other cheek. They start a 5-generation blood feud. Actually, there's something deeper to turn the other cheek that I had explained to me about 20 years ago, which is it's actually, it's not just like allowing the person to hit you twice. It's forcing the person to hit you in a certain way that puts them in a place where they'll get in trouble for doing it. Because they have to, if you turn the other cheek, they have to hit you with an open hand, or they have to hit you with a fist rather than the backhand, which is means you're actually assaulting them. You're not disciplining a peasant. You're actually beating a peasant, and there's a difference there. Your renown is too low. Remember when the U.S. tanks were driving behind the Iraqi general while he was saying, everything is fine? Great analysis of Izzat. Do you ever think of this anthropologically as humans have branched out of the tribal system that we lived in for 99.9% of existence? Yes, I do. I studied anthropology when I was an undergraduate, and I find it a really fascinating course of study, especially physical anthropology, that is like archaeology, and physical anthropology is also just another branch of basically like looking at evidence in the ground, looking at skeletons and things like that. Very fun course of study. Cultural, I didn't realize until I was out of college that cultural anthropology has a really bad reputation. And I think it's because the anthropology department when I was an undergrad wasn't this way. Even the cultural anthropologists were really about studying culture. They hadn't been completely paused yet. They hadn't been completely sucked into the woke mind virus. So it was really just like looking at other cultures and evaluating how they work and just evaluating them on their own terms. That's what an anthropologist ought to do, rather than trying to prescribe something that like our culture should be more like them or anything like that. It's just, let's learn about that culture from, on its own terms, not as a Westerner kind of impressing my values upon them, but just like, let's see what they do. What do they do and why do they do it and why do they develop this? Try to be very neutral. But for me, it's like, it's okay to study neutrally and then take a step back and be like, I don't want that here. I don't want Izzat here. I could study like how Indian social dynamics work and also say, we don't want that anywhere near my country. There are now more Indians from India than American Indians. Yeah. So, I think someone mentioned that minimum wage should be $50 an hour to compensate for inflation. Yeah, if you were paid $1 in silver quarters, how much would that 1 ounce of silver be? It'd be like $30. So it's a quarter. A quarter used to weigh like a quarter ounce, and it used to be made completely of silver. So you were really getting paid in like a metal standard up until like 1964, I think. Your coins were worth their silver, which is kind of cool to think about. But the flip side of that is that things get cheaper through not just through like reduction of labor costs, because that's part of it, but economies gain efficiency over time. You mechanize more, you figure out more efficient ways of doing things. Just like how you get better at a job that you do, you get more efficient at it the more you do it. Economies in general kind of are that way. So what's interesting is like you have a candy bar, and the candy bars are still made here in America. For the most part, right? In fact, I lived kind of by like down the street from a chocolate factory in California. So I know that they still made the chocolate here in the United States. It was a Hershey's plant forever. But the candy bar when I was a kid was 50 cents and now it's $1. Okay. Actually, yeah. Let's say when I was a kid, actually, I remember as a kid, it was 65 cents and now it's $1. So it's inflation. It actually hasn't kept up with inflation, right? Like inflation should mean it should be like $1.30 or something like that. That's because companies got a little bit better at making the product. It's just really the same size candy bar. They haven't really shrunk it much, if they have shrunk it, but there's lots of things that go into that calculation of inflation that we kind of forget about. And that's why the bundle, like what do they call it? Call it a basket of goods. That's how they figure out, consumer price index and things like that, is they have a basket of goods, and they cheat on it all the time. That's a whole nother can of worms. But you have that because sometimes products get cheaper and cheaper. And that means that even if wages are stagnating, if the cost of goods are going down, then you're actually gaining more economic power. So I don't know, inflation's a really tricky one. I wouldn't say it has to be $50 an hour, like for minimum wage, because a lot of things are very cheap, but you do get the idea that, like, if you were paid in the same amount of silver, it'd be like $35 worth of silver today. So the metal's pretty stable. Is my point. Yeah, you're a schmuck for being courteous and honest. That's the way that a lot of third worlders work. It's like, you're stupid for letting me get one over on you, and I'm smart for taking your money. Oh yeah, Speedy has a cousin called Slowpoke Rodriguez. Mexicans like Speedy Gonzalez. He's like the hero. He wins. Yeah, he's kind of based on some cultural stereotypes. No big deal. Speedy's usually doing a good job. Speedy's a good guy. How to keep inflation in check under UBI, $20 gallon of milk. So that's the other question of UBI. There'd be inflation. If you replaced all of the social welfare programs with UBI, it wouldn't inflate things because it'd be like the same amount of money you're spending. The problem is you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that at all because there'd be somebody who acted irresponsibly, and you'd have to figure out how to take care of that edge case. And if you want to go back to old America, what we do is you let local charities figure that. You let the people who are local in that community figure out how to deal with those edge cases. And that's what happens. And sometimes some people are worse off for no fault of their own, especially if they're a child. We understand that children are innocent. We want to take care of the children. But we also kind of get that, like, the people that are near them are the ones who should really step up and take care of the children. You know what I mean? Embolden the low rent people again. Before Caleb Hammer, I might have been on board with UBI. Seeing how financially illiterate people are tells me it's a bad idea. So that's the thing, right? Is like, people think about, if I had this, what would I do? The people you're giving it to do not think like you. So they're not going to do the things that you would do at all. Some will. And to them, it's a big benefit, but a lot won't. And then you have to decide what you're going to do about that. I know how that is. Too removed to pack a lunch. Too removed to give is what I learned in school. Too removed to be removed. Yeah. Yeah. The parents just are checked out. I remember this movie came out maybe 20 years ago. It was called Precious. And it was very controversial because it portrayed these blacks on welfare, this black single mother and her child who had basically an incest baby with her father, right? This is showing the black community in a really bad light. And I didn't see it that way, maybe because I'm not black and I'm not sensitive to that. I'll accept that, right? But I saw it as like, this is painting a picture for people who don't know, who maybe they're not a teacher in a Title I inner city school that sees this kind of thing regularly, or they aren't black, right? It shows them kind of the worst aspect of American welfare culture. And is it unrealistic? You're going to find plenty of anecdotes for people that were like Precious, obese, getting pregnant at like 14, still in 8th grade at 16, things like that. You're going to find those anecdotes. So the question is sort of like, what do you do about them? It shines a light. Like, some people are going to be, they're going to be terrible no matter what welfare benefits you give them. They're not going to improve their lives. You're basically keeping them. And it's like with Precious, it's not like you're keeping her from starving. She's obese. And that's kind of where American poor people are. It's like no one's in danger of starving. But if we see a kid who is sitting alone, not eating, he's going hungry, that's an intolerable situation for most people. The teachers would end up buying him lunch, and they'd be like, it isn't fair that I have to buy the kid lunch because no one else will. It's like, it's really not fair. You're right. So we'll just feed all the kids for a great expense to everybody. I live in a rural community now. They're not well off, but they do value working hard and trying to scrape by to make ends meet. When I taught in a more inner city area, people were lazy and entitled. So when I lived in rural California, everybody worked. Everybody was really hard worker, even the poorest people. People always viewed work as a means to like gain another end, that is to like move up. Even like the poor immigrants were working so that they could get out of where they were and like rent a better place or buy a better place or buy a piece of land. I lived by a guy who flew a black flag over his property. He was from Mexico. He started as farm labor, moved up, bought a piece of land and started farming himself. He's like, I wanted to own the farm. And there's so many people that are like that. And when they're out there in the work environment where everybody's gaining by working, then they gain by working too. That's very different from the inner city where people are on welfare and they kind of view their life as a passive experience rather than an active experience. So, I'm not like against immigrants in general, right? I've lived with them. I've dealt with them. I've known them. I've been friends with them. And, the problem is looking at it as an entire thing. That's always my argument. My brother worked for our local police department. He said that about 75% of the DUI arrests were illegal immigrants, mostly from Mexico and Central America. I've heard things like that. I think it depends where you're at, I will say if the state mandates schooling, then the state should front the food cost. I mean, that's an interesting way of thinking about it, yeah. They also, I think about that sometimes with like school supplies. The teachers demand that the parents buy all these expensive school supplies. And it's like, I'm already paying a huge amount of money in property taxes. You can't buy a 10-cent pencil for my kid. And the truth is you do that. And the very conscientious parents, they buy all the expensive pencils. And what do those kids do with those expensive pencils? They lend them to the kids whose parents don't give a shit. I lived it. There was always a kid whose parents didn't give a shit about buying him anything, and you lent him paper, and you gave him paper, and you lent him a piece of paper that you're never going to get back. You lend him a pencil that he forgets about and breaks, right? You just give him the people who have just give out of their abundance to the kid whose parents don't give a crap, right? So it's kind of unfair, but it is what it is, The conscientious parents pay for the unconscientious. Government handouts discourage community. Yeah, that's true. Because then it's about my interaction with the state. The state becomes daddy. It's the nanny state. Not like we're a community that has to take care of each other. I think we all know what you're getting at, but it kind of sucks that you can't say it outright. I pretty much say what I want to outright. But people who are clever know that like there's certain things you can't just say on YouTube. You know what I mean? People will sell their EBT for cash. Oh, yeah. It was a problem with the food stamps. The physical food stamps used to get these, they were like bills. They looked like Monopoly money and used to get them and people would sell them for 50% of their cash value. And if you were poor, that's what you wanted to do, If you were broke, you'd find a guy who had food stamps and wanted to sell his food stamps and you'd buy $100 worth of food stamps for $50. Then you could buy $100 worth of food and it was great for you. So the clever people were able to like get double the value of food stamps and the low rent people just wouldn't feed their kids. That's what it came down to. They would sell the EBT for cash and spend the cash on something else that they wanted. Such as alcohol. Let's see here. Negative consequences. Okay, people talk about the fact that you can, in fact, legislate morality. We do it often. When we legalized abortion was off the table till it was legalized. And then all of a sudden there's lots of people who think it's good. right? Why? Because it's legal. People do it all the time. They are very much downstream of what is in their environment. They are not conscientious. They're not coming up with a moral reasoning for anything they do. They simply act, and that's how it is. And that's where people get their morality from, 9 times out of 10. Zimamaro, I'm starting to think xenophobia is actually good. It's the default state for humanity, and we don't have to call it xenophobia, like afraid of the outsider. We can just say, I prefer to live my way and my neighbor to live his way. I prefer neighbors, not roommates. You know, that's how I think about any other culture, right? I can appreciate that culture as it's not my culture, and I don't want it to be my culture. I don't need it to be my culture. Yeah, I'm okay with being neighbors and not roommates, right? Think of your neighbor. You may like your neighbor. You may tolerate your neighbor. But like if he was your roommate, you'd be like, you drink too much. You smoke cigarettes. I don't like that. But if your neighbor's smoking cigarettes, that doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? So there's a difference between neighbors and roommates. Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. Amazing how all these healthy at any size activists are suddenly taking Ozempic. Once you could get a pill, I'm pro Ozempic, by the way. So I've thought about it a lot and I've talked about it. I'm just going to say I'm pro Ozempic. I'm pro GLP-1 injections. I don't use them. Maybe I could get like I could get lean. I'm not super lean right now, a little chubby, but like I could probably get really lean with Ozempic. Why not? But in general, I'm for it because obesity is a medical issue. I think you can have a medical intervention. If it was as simple as these people just need to learn to diet and exercise. Well, if they could diet and exercise on their own, then they would just do that. Okay. I like to deal with reality as it is, not reality as it's not. I like to adjust my expectations to reality, not try to do the inverse. So if somebody has a medical issue like obesity and they are suffering medical consequences from it, their joints are worn out, they have high blood pressure, they have type 2 diabetes, and we can give them an injection that will reduce that and maybe restore their health, then I am all for it. And the problem is people are comparing Ozempic to like hardcore diet and exercise. I don't think that's a good comparison because if the people were capable of hardcore diet and exercise, they would just do that. Not everyone has the inner will to be a fitness model and you have to think like for somebody, let's say somebody is really obese. They're like, they need to be 200 pounds and they're 350 pounds. They're a man, let's say. So they got to lose 150 pounds. We're going to diet like a fitness model and we're going to lose 2 pounds of fat a week. That's a pretty serious diet. So how many weeks is that going to take? 75 weeks. So you're looking at a year and a half of consistent, hardcore dieting, exercise every day in order to get down to a healthy weight. You're not even shredded at that point. That's just like your healthy weight is 200 pounds. People are like, how over are you? I'm 215 pounds. I'm 215 pounds right now. Right? Actually, if I stepped on the scale, it might be 220. I'm 215 when I wake up. I was 213 actually when I woke up this morning. Right? But anyway, you get down to 200 pounds. You're not even like shredded yet. Right? But you're healthy at least. To ask somebody to live the fitness bodybuilder monk lifestyle for a year and a half is a lot. I think you can do anything for 6 weeks. I think 6 weeks, you could put somebody through an intense 6-week like crash diet, cycle of steroids or something to get them on track. But for long-term stuff, it's really hard. If people had that drive to do it, if they can like muster up the will to do that, then that's great. I was able to do it when I was about 28. I was able to cut down and get like really in good shape, but I didn't have a whole lot else going on. I was broke living in Vegas and I just like performed and like taught lessons and lifted weights, and that was my life. And I wrote and I did other creative things, but like I had a lot of time. I could spend 2 hours a day at the gym. People don't have time. They have obligations. They're tired, right? And the more obese you are, the harder it is to get moving, the harder it is to like make that first step. So yeah, take the GLP-1. In fact, I would say I'm actually in favor of whatever's beyond that. I've had a couple people that I've come across have suggested, like, you know what we should do is, like, we should take these people and not just give them GLP-1. We should be giving them like Anavar. We should be giving them anabolic steroids so that they can, and then do that for 6 weeks, put them in like a 6-week drug program so that they cut a bunch of fat, but then they also gain a bunch of muscle so that their basically their metabolism is just permanently higher even when you come off of the drugs. When you come off of steroids, the rule of thumb is that you're going to keep about half the gains. So if you get on steroids and you put on 20 pounds of muscle, you come off, you're going to keep 10 pounds of muscle. But that extra 10 pounds of muscle may increase your daily caloric intake by like 200 or 300 calories, which can make a difference over the long term. So, it's like, do the whole thing, like get them in shape for 6 weeks and then keep them on the GLP-1 until they lose all the weight. And it's going to have less risk even doing something like that than doing bariatric surgery. So when we compare to, like, why don't they just live like fitness models? Well, if they could, they would. But we should compare it to bariatric surgery. Like, what are the risks involved of cutting out a person's stomach so that they can't eat as much food, so that they slowly starve enough to get thin? What's the risks of that versus the GLP-1? I think the GLP-1 is, as far as what I've seen, and I've seen some doctors comment on this, there's way fewer risks. Because at the GLP-1, if you're suffering bad side effects from the GLP-1, you can just stop taking it. You can stop taking it and, like, basically recover, but you can't undo bariatric surgery, and the kind of long tail rarer consequences from surgery can be much more severe. So the GLP-1 should be like the first line there. Ozempic has caused some horrific intestinal damage in some people compared to bariatric surgery, which has caused people to die as well, right? So I'm not saying there's no side effects to Ozempic, but it's a much better alternative than a bariatric surgery. So that's the comparison you need to make, in my opinion, right? Do you think the uptick in ultra emaciated celebrities, like Ariana Grande, Cynthia Erivo, even Haley Atwell is starting to get skinny now, is due to Ozempic or just under eating? So my instinct actually says it's Ozempic, because the Ozempic causes under eating, because it's a massive appetite suppressant. It makes it easier to diet. It makes it easy. So it is under eating. It's both, but my instinct says it's Ozempic, and the reason is, like, we've had like thin pressure before in Hollywood, but we haven't seen these emaciated celebrities like this anymore. These ones that look like little twinks. To me, they look like prepubescent boys. So I don't know. My conspiracy theorist thing says that, like, they're getting pressure basically to look like prepubescent boys, to look like twinks, and not really like adult females that are attractive. I'm not sure where that pressure comes from, other than, like, Hollywood's very gay, but it looks like, they maybe some drug use to get to that thin state. Even somebody who was like a really big fitness person, Jennifer Aniston lost some weight at some point in, like, her friend's career, and made, people talked about that. Like, is she too skinny now? But she's nowhere near as skinny as these other celebrities are. And, like, she didn't get, like, unhealthily low body fat where you could, like, see the tops of her ribs or anything like that I remember. Like, is she anorexic? Like, these celebrities look like they have anorexia nervosa. But it could be Ozempic, because Ozempic tanks that's the way it works as a weight loss drug, is it tanks your appetite so that you just won't eat as much. So that works for a lot of people, because the problem most obese people have with trying to diet is that they're hungry. It's really hard to not be hungry, like, and to deal with hunger. Like, hunger is an impulse we have for our survival. So to ignore and overcome that is difficult. That's why monks fast. It's a difficult discipline to fast. So this is why I'm like, for someone to lose 150 pounds, It's a year and a half to 2 years of monk-like aesthetic lifestyle. No treats, nothing that you think tastes good. Exercising and pushing yourself every day for 2 years to lose the weight. That is hard. It is very difficult to say someone should just do that instead of taking Ozempic. I think they should do that as well to their best of their ability, but maybe like there's something that's like a middle ground that more people can do. You need to walk for 30 minutes and you need to lift some weights a couple times a week so you don't have muscle wasting. And then we're going to give you an appetite suppressant so that it's a lot easier to diet. I'm always dieting in a sense because I don't want to gain weight again. So I'm always diet conscious, but I allow in my diet like plenty of things that I probably shouldn't. And if I cut all of those out, then I would probably be leaner than I am now. But it's like a temptation thing. If the donut, how often can you walk by the donut on the counter and resist eating it? I don't have infinite willpower. I'm going to eat that donut. I'm going to eat it. There's all kinds of anecdotes about people prepping for bodybuilding shows, and what do? They break down and they eat a box of cereal. They binge on a box of cereal because they're so hungry. Hunger is a survival impulse. So you're asking people to deal with a survival impulse for years. When we're fasting religiously, we're only fasting for limited periods of time, 40 days maybe for Lent. And that's not even a hard fast. That's like we're avoiding certain foods that we crave and that are delicious, right? I'm talking like, maybe there's a Marian fast or an Advent fast. These are limited time fasts. For the person who needs to lose 150 pounds, they have to fast for 2 years straight and not mess up on the way, or it puts that target weight that further off. And it gets harder as you go, by the way, guys. So if you've never lost a lot of weight, let me tell you, it gets harder as you go. When you first start and you get a diet, this is why I'm like, just start somewhere and it's going to be effective. You start losing weight and then you have a plateau because your diet has too much food in it. You have to start cutting calories again. And then you get to another plateau. I'm not losing weight anymore. You have to cut more calories. You have to cut. You don't realize how little somebody is eating in order to get down to like single digit body fat. I remember a video a while back. It was Chris Bumstead, who is, heavier than me, I think. How much? I don't know what his stage weight is, but he's like 5% body fat and heavier than me. And he's not even like an open bodybuilding competitor. This guy was eating 1,500 calories a day. And people are like, 1,500 calories a day? That's like way less than I eat. It's like, yeah, well, he's a competitor. That's what he has to eat in order to force his body to get down to that low body fat percentage. And it's hard. It's hard. I remember this video of Kai Green, and he had just done the Mr. Olympia. He got like 3rd place, right? Which is incredible, but it was disappointing for him, I think. Or maybe he was 2nd place. And he's at a diner eating this hamburger and eating these French fries, right? Just eating this delicious meal. And he goes, sometimes you get at this point where it's like, if I have to eat one more sweet potato, and he didn't finish the sentence, like you're going to crack if you have to eat one more sweet potato. Because you're feeding your body only the bare amount that it needs in perfect nutrition in order to get to that fasted perfect state on stage. It's like it's torture, and pain is not really defined by its intensity, but its duration. My friend Andy told me this. And of course, Andy ended up tolerating a lot because he got cancer later on. And so he ended up having a lot of pain he had to tolerate. But it's the length of time you have to endure that pain really defines how bad the pain is, not so much like it's an intense thing, right? A really intense pain that then goes away, like being pinched or stung by a wasp is not that bad. But being hungry is often less tolerable than being stung by a wasp because you're just hungry. You're hungry that entire time, and you have to figure out how to just be hungry, to ignore a basic survival impulse, Like, I don't have infinite willpower. I'm hungry. I'm hungry right now because I haven't eaten since like 3 p.m. It's okay. I'm a little hungry. When I finish this up, I'll go eat. So a lot of good diets there's strategies for how to deal with hunger. We got to be real. Like you're going to be hungry when you're dieting. So being honest about it, like, here's how you can deal with some of the hunger. You can intermittent fast so that you know that there's a window where you're not going to be hungry at all. All right. You're going to deal with the hunger at the first part of the day so that you can be satiated at night. That's a strategy. Eating really filling food. So if you eat chicken, eat a chicken breast and a salad. If you have a chicken salad, that'll make you feel really full. But it's not high calorie. So it can prevent you from, it could stave off that hunger a little bit later. You know what I mean? Yeah, we are in the infancy of these medications, as Dark Rider is correct. There's new ones that are coming out. Retrotrutide, I think, is the new one, that are better, that are supposed to be better. So, yeah, we're looking at like the first generation of any kind of drug, right? Like we're comparing Benadryl to, whatever the next one will be, Zyrtec or something, right? Benadryl works, but it's got all these bad side effects. The next one will work better and have fewer side effects. Adding corrective medical interventions to my cyberpunk dystopia setting. Ozempic is being linked to shrinkage of the heart muscles, which is infinitely worse. Well, it's linked to them because of that happens under starvation conditions. So, is the cause Ozempic? Is Ozempic directly causing that? No, I mean, I'm not a doctor, so this is not a medical opinion, but other doctors will have this opinion, so you can find them, is that often happens with people who are starving. So the Ozempic is causing you to not eat enough food, which is the point of the diet. So you should probably maybe the calories should be higher or the dosage should be lower, But people, if they could take a drug that will make them stop being hungry, they're going to take it. There are many inappropriate uses of Ozempic, which is true. Ozempic lets you spontaneously be able to eat less and reduce appetite. Ideally, your brain could shrink under starvation conditions too. Ideally, our brains would spontaneously balance input and output to keep everyone at a healthy weight, but evolutionary pressures did not favor that. This is the exact point, right? Why do we want to pack on as much fat as possible, right? We want to pack on fat because we may not get a meal tomorrow. That's why. It may be that you can't eat tomorrow. So we store our energy as fat because food is scarce and uncertain. But now food is plentiful and certain, but we still have our biological survival mechanisms that are built to acquire as much food as possible for the coming winter. We're in a time that the winter never comes. European pheasants would fatten up during the fall, and then in winter you eat lean because there's less food until spring comes and you could start eating a little bit of food again, right? We're eating for a winter that never comes. Yeah, asceticism. I'm interested to try fasting after the holidays. Seems like a lot of benefits if done safely. Well, there's Advent fasting. You could fast for the Advent. You could fast with the church. Church fasting is to a different purpose. If you're talking, lots of people experiment with different kinds of fasts, multi-day fasts, intermittent fasting. I've used it to get really lean before, and I would do it again. But my lifestyle and my arrangement of life doesn't really fit that all that well because I have to feed my children. So because I got to feed them, it's really hard for me to just not eat anything, right? Even like today, I basically ate I ate bacon and eggs and my kids' crumbs from like their pancakes or whatever. We had shortcakes today, but same idea. But that's plenty of calories there in those sugar cakes. So it's really hard for me to just not eat breakfast myself. I could do it, but it would be really hard to resist the temptation to eat for the rest of the day. To skip that breakfast meal is hard for me right now. But, if you're single and you can control that, what I used to do is I'd wake up, go to work, and then drink a bunch of BCAAs and go to the gym and then eat after that. I got lean. It was good. Yes, what Carl says, gymnastics rings are the best. Like calisthenics can do a lot of work. People are like, I can't go to the gym. Like, dude, you could do push-ups and sit-ups on your floor and you will gain a lot of strength from that. It's hard to do. It's like, I can't go to the gym. Can you do 100 push-ups? It's hard to do 100 push-ups in a row. Try it. How many pull-ups can you do? Find a place, run down to the playground and jump on the monkey bars and start. How many pull-ups can you do? If you can't do one, we'll start working on that. you know? There's a lot there. You don't have to have a gym. I built a gym in my garage. I'm very lucky. I'm very blessed to be able to do that. Have you tried Hot Light Krispy Kreme, though? Ever wonder how your super intellect would fare if transplanted into an Aegean island? I don't know. Fortunately, I don't like donuts. I love donuts. I gained 22 pounds since being married. Happens in a happy marriage, I guess. So this happens. I gained a little bit of weight when I got married, not a ton, but it's because I was eating meals with my wife all the time, and my wife would cook a meal, and that meal was not my bodybuilding meal. It was like a normal meal. And it turns out when you eat like a normal person, you start to look like a normal person. You're not shredded anymore. You're not super lean and jacked. You get chubby. You get soft. I also gained weight after my son was born because I ended up with plantar fasciitis in both my feet, which meant I couldn't do my normal cardio. I couldn't work out. It was too painful to walk for like 6 months. And I was on my feet 8 hours a day as a teacher, in absolute agony. Because I had to feed my family, right? I couldn't just not work. But that was bad. But I didn't adjust my diet. And then you're working and you're just eating, let's go over to the supermarket and have Chinese food. You're just eating bad food all the time. You gain a bunch of weight. It's really easy to gain weight, really easy. Like I said, there's a lot worse moral feelings than you ate too much food. There's a lot of delicious food and it's basically free and you just ate too much of it. You could forgive yourself for that. It's harder to lose the weight, but that's fine. You just have to be disciplined for 6 or 8 weeks. If it's only 20 pounds, you could go on a 3-month diet and probably cut it off. I have to consciously decide to eat over 1,000 calories a day. I'm trying to gain weight, so I have to get started eating early in the day to be hungry for each meal. That's interesting. I cut all processed flour since Lent last year. It's been a good choice. Need to cut out more sugar, though. Once I start eating for the day, the hunger will persist, but if I don't eat till late afternoon, it doesn't affect me. I find that if you're fasting in the morning, it's usually easier to tolerate than in the evening. If you've had 3 meals, it's really hard to be hungry when you're ready for bed, but different guys have different perspectives. So I saw Derek, more plates, more dates. He's like, yeah, I can go to bed hungry. So he would eat only in the middle of the day because it's like, if I'm tired, I can still sleep even if I'm hungry. And when I'm sleeping, I'm not eating, right? And that's what you have to do to get shredded, right? It's just, you got to really limit your calories. Did you see the whole thing with Campbell's chick noodle soup? I have not. There's no free lunch and no miracle cure. But there are, my point is, we come up with many medical interventions for things. If you have a headache, you can take ibuprofen. Ibuprofen does have some consequences. But if you are only using it for an occasional headache, the consequences are basically nil. And its benefits are really obvious. So a really good medical intervention will be something like that, where it's like the downsides are going to be really small or very limited in time, and only become an issue when you're using too much of it or using it for too long or something like that. And then the upsides are going to be a lot more obvious. So it's just kind of weighing that out. We use medical interventions for all kinds of things. We replace hips to get rid of pain. We do lots of things. I don't have my hearing aid on, but I have an implant in my head, right? It's a medical intervention for hearing loss. It's not a perfect solution, but it's better than nothing, better than doing nothing. And so that's why I'm kind of pro Ozempic. It's better than just letting the person be obese. Well, they should diet and exercise. Great. That's a great perspective to have. They should do that. They haven't done that, though, so maybe there's something else we can do to help them eat less. My husband can't tolerate hunger. He gets so irrationally angry. I could power through hunger better. Curious to see why not eating for 3 days will challenge that. I don't think I would do. I personally am not interested in doing that crazy amount of fasting, but people do it on YouTube, so. Go on a hunger strike for George R. R. Martin to finish his book. You'll be waiting a while. Diet for fitness is foreign. Foreign if you do not grow up in an older village or like farming come, you grow it, eat it, period. That's an interesting, I think the idea of dieting down, it probably is a modern construction because we have so much cheap food and we don't grow it. We can just sit around and have it delivered to our doors in exchange for doing PowerPoint presentations or something stupid like that. You know, I saw a video on Romanian vending machines. The lady saw whole milk and vegetables in them. Far cry from what we put in ours, but we know they did that deliberately here. I wouldn't, well, I mean, I deliberately, yes, but like to make you sick, no. Why do we put the things we put in, why don't we put vegetables in a vending machine? Because they go bad. And we stock the vending machines occasionally, so we put processed foods in vending machines because they keep for longer. That's a big one. They taste better. That's another question. But we don't put vegetables in the vending machine because you'd have to be restocking the vending machine every day. That's a labor cost. I know people who ran vending machine businesses with sodas. You don't want to be restocking them every day. It's just it's a huge extra cost. So there's more to it than that. You know? There's plenty of vending machines that have, you know, protein bars or something in them that's a little bit better nutrition. And people get those too. Why did they put protein bars in them? If they want you to be sick. Well, they don't want you to be sick. They're just putting the things in that people buy. So if people buy a lot of chips, that's not the fault of the vending machine company for stocking chips, right? They're looking at it like, all the Lay's got bought and none of the vegetable sticks got bought. I know which one I'm going to stock next time. It's not going to be the vegetable sticks. It's going to be the Lay's. They're not evil for stocking the things that people want to buy. They're just running a business. They're just giving people what they want. Oh my gosh, I remember Christian Bale losing weight for the Machinist. It was just crazy. All right. I think that's about it for today. I'm a little bit over time, so I'm going to check it there. Hopefully you've enjoyed discussing Izzat. I will link it again for you guys. I think I have it here somewhere. Boop, boop, boop. Nope. Nope. Where did I do with it? Boop, boop, boop. I will give you the link for the Izzat explanation. Doot, doot, doot. We will copy and paste that into the chat where you can get it. And I'll link everything else. Please do check out my Patreon. You get, there's books that are available as the Patreon membership, including Keys to Prolific Creativity, my book on managing your creative process and designing a creative process to help you achieve your goals. A lot of people have really liked that book, so I will link the Patreon. What am I doing right now in terms of art? I am working on music, actually, and I'm working on a large-scale guitar piece. I don't really have time to do it, to like show you more of the material. I demoed a little bit of the material a couple weeks ago, so I'll show more of that. I have the first movement is pretty well developed, so I'm going to start trying to do a demo recording of that pretty soon. The second movement is there's one major section I need to write for that, but that I've developed a lot of material for that already. The third movement is pretty much written. So the third movement I think is I'm gonna once I do the demo recording, I'll listen to it. I feel like if there's any more that I need to do for that rondo movement. And the fourth movement is still kind of in its gray goo inception point where I'm still playing with a lot of the ideas to figure out what's going to stick together and how to connect all the different pieces together. But it's arranged like a regular sonata, so it's a major guitar work. Fast. First movement is fast. I'm calling that first movement riffs because it's you'll recognize it. It's like a very fingerstyle guitar riff oriented piece. With some Baroque elements. The second one is a mixture of jazz and Baroque elements, which I think is going to be really cool when I'm actually able to pull it off. And this is stuff that I'm all going to play. I'm all going to play live, hopefully. And then the third movement is in 7/4. It's a kind of a mid-tempo piece and with some alternations between 4/4 and 3/4, which I think is fun. It creates some cool phrasing. And then the fourth movement is kind of like the first so far for what material I have designed for it. But we'll see how it all turns out. That's kind of where my focus is. It's on music for right now. I want to get this major guitar work done and then kind of decide what's next after that. But this is where my mind is, and it's where I feel like I can strike the iron while it's hot, is doing this outside the box, a little bit major classical guitar work, and then the next sonata is going to be way weirder. I have other ideas for that, so that's going to be more about what electric guitar can do. So I'm writing this piece on not on classical guitar, though you can play it on classical guitar because it doesn't require anything special, but it's archtop. So it's really a piece for archtop guitar, but you could play it on classical guitar if you wanted to. So waiting for the Zool vinyl. I should make a Zool vinyl, but I would probably have to crowdfund it to see how many people want to buy it. And if nobody wants to buy it, then I won't make it. You know, that would be a great thing to crowdfund, actually, is like a vinyl pressing, because then it's like, I know exactly how many people want this. I'm not just like rolling the dice to see how many people want this physical product. We'll, you know, crowdfund it, including the cost of mastering and all that kind of stuff, and then send everybody a record. So anyway, that's what I'm doing now. So you can support me on Patreon, and you can check out my Substack, and I write an article every week on that. And I'll see you all next time. Stay tuned for more videos. Have a great one.